Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. So it is about that time. Lilith has announced two new infantry commanders. We all knew that they'd be Smite, we all knew that they'd be a Garrison, and one Field, and they have officially been announced. Now, generally, I would have two separate videos for both these commanders, but they were announced at the exact same time. So we're going to go over both their kits today, kind of where I see them lining up in the field, and how strong they are. And spoiler alert, they are very strong. All right, now the first one up on your screen is the Garrison Commander. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name before I completely embarrass myself, so I'm just going to call him Toku for the rest of this video. So we have Toku, he is Infantry, Garrison, and Smite. Now his active skill, I think, is obviously on this new trend of the 3000 damage factor. We just had the Subutai rally come into the game, which has 3000 damage factor, and this has 2400 damage factor and a 600 factor shield, obviously equaling that 3000, the kind of new threshold that Lilith has established for the upcoming commanders in the game. So it is called OI over Sekigara. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing all these, but give me a break, all right? So it is a single target active skill, rage requirement 1000. It does 2400 smite damage and does a very small debuff of 10% defense for 3 seconds. You also gain a 600 damage factor mighty shield for 2 seconds. Now remember, mighty shields are different than normal shielding. It scales with the amount of troops that you have, so it is a lot better in something like a Garrison where you have more troops, and it stacks with other shielding effects, so again, really good. Next up, we have the Mikawa Bushi. All right, kind of sounds like a funny name, whatever that means. And whenever this commander's troop launches a base attack or counterattack, their infantry units have a 25% chance to gain 30% attack for 4 seconds. Otherwise, you have 10% march speed, which is kind of useless in a Garrison, and 10% defense. Now, this skill on paper is weak. This skill stinks. I'll just be straight up honest. A conditional 25% chance for 30% attack. Even if this was 30% attack and 10% defense and 10% march speed, this skill would be weak. Nowadays, we just have commanders that have upwards of 50 to 60% of stats on any given skill in their kit. And now, granted, it's 25%. It lasts for 4 seconds. If you do the math, that's theoretically about 100% uptime, especially if you're getting swarmed. This will almost always be up, but why not just make it 100%? You know, like just make it 30% attack and 10% defense. I don't know. This is a little odd for me, but either way, I'm not super impressed with the second skill. The active skill is good. Second skill, kind of mediocre. Now we have this one, Nico. All right, Nico Tosho, whenever you are serving as a Garrison commander, right, so not on the field, you deal 10% more damage. Now, I kind of wish this said 10% more normal damage. I'm kind of bummed that it says more damage, because remember, if you are using the Arch formation or possibly the Smite formation coming out, normal damage is actually better than all damage, which is crazy, right? So, whenever you deal Smite damage, you have a chance to cleanse slow, poison, exhaustion, or normal debuff effects from itself. If the effect has multiple stacks, it only cleanses 1 stack. So I think that this means it can only dispel one thing at once, which means that this is worse than something like Theodora's old active skill that removed all poison debuff effects. You know, this is, again, not super impressed with this one, but it could serve you well in something like a 1v1 in a rally or Garrison. It also gains 1 stack of the Tosho effect for 10 seconds. Each stack increases the health of the Garrison's inf units by 5%, and it can stack up to 4 times, so 20% health. So you're getting a little bit of that tankiness that we were missing in the first skill, but 20% health, again, that stacks. I don't know, is it good? It kind of seems like this commander gets better as the rally goes on, but 20% health, 10% defense, and a conditional 30% attack for today's standards of commanders is not really what we're looking for, so hopefully something else in this kit is really, really solid. But again, this only procs when you deal smite damage, and it's only a 25% chance, so your active skill with Gorgo, any instant proc damage, which we'll see later on in the kit, or anything else, maybe this commander's active skill could give you this chance to give you some more health. And then we have its fourth skill, which is the Nagashino Gambit. Whenever the Garrison receives a buff, it has a 50% chance to gain a damage-absorbing Mighty Shield for 3 seconds, damage factor 1,200. Now, where do you see buffs in this game? Well, obviously, this this is a buff. You know, like you can buff yourself by giving yourself more health. You can buff yourself by giving yourself more attack, right? Like these are obviously parts of the kit that are designed to give this commander more mighty shields, making this commander super, super tanky. If you are also pairing with Gorgo as a primary or secondary, we'll go over that a little bit later, but Gorgo also, her active skill gives you a buff and she also procs more buffs. So this theoretically should be up pretty much constantly. I know it has a 7-second cooldown, but as soon as that 7-second cooldown is going to come up, there's going to be a ton of buffs firing off on this Garrison, so it's going to be quite strong. And again, 1200 mighty shield factor is quite a lot. And its expertise now is the Siege of Osaka. Whenever this commander's troop launches a basic attack or counterattack, so if somebody else hits it 1 of 10 targets, it has a 50% chance, 30% if it has a shield, and this commander does quite a lot of shielding, to deal smite damage to up to 3 enemy troops in a fan, damage factor 300. Every additional target reduces its damage, cooldown 10 seconds. All right, so this expertise is pretty weak in the grand scheme of things. I think this 1200 mighty shield is quite strong. I think that this effect is also quite weak. I think that the second skill is also relatively weak, and I think the primary skill is really, really strong. So what do I think of this commander, and what do I think of its pairings? And well, now that we're in game, I think it's pretty obvious. There's only one answer. You're going to run Gorgo primary to Toku secondary. And the synergy here is super, super obvious. Literally, Toku benefits from getting buffs on a 900 active skill. You have a buff that you're giving yourself. You're getting instant proc smite damage, you're getting more buffs from this skill, and you're getting more mighty shielding synergy. It seems like everything is kind of paired up so that these are buffing each other and giving yourself shields. Now, the weaknesses of this pairing, I think that in general, it's tanky, and in general, it's got a lot of counterattack damage because of its normal damage amplification, which also increases your counterattack damage, but it kind of lacks some stats. Now, Gorgo is great. You got your 40% attack here and a debuff. You've got this 30% health here and an instant proc, but Toku's kit, remember, we have 10% all damage, 10% defense, and conditional attack, and then conditional health that has to stack. So if you are in high level KVKs and your March or your Garrison, gets swarmed instantly, I think it's going to actually die pretty quickly. It's got a lot of shielding, which can help that, but I do think that it lacks a little bit of defensive tankiness right off the rip. But will it still be strong? Obviously, very, very good. So with that said, let's go over the open field commander and how I feel about it. Now, this is what most of you are probably interested in. This is the open field smite commander. It's got infantry, versatility, smite, by key, the deity of death, and my golly is he. His active skill is probably the strongest single damage factor active skill that we've seen in this game. It is 5 target, half circle AoE, 2400 damage factor, and each target has a 30% chance to take 15% extra damage. Now, I assume that it's 15% extra damage from the active skill, not just a debuff of 50% extra damage. But this is insane. This is what people are going to get this commander for. You want to pair this commander with Liu Che, and you are going to do an absurd amount of smite damage just for this active skill alone. Even if the kit's bad, well, spoiler alert, you're going to run this commander. So, obviously, active skill, we're going to give this an S+, one of the best, if not the best open field skill in the game. And then we have the Breaker of Battle Lines. This skill, very, very good. So far this commander is 2 for 2. You've got 20% march speed, check. 10% health, not too much, but I'm not going to complain, check. And 40% attack, check. So you remember what I was talking about with the Garrison commander. This right here is 50% of stats and then 70% of like open field stats. And that's what we're looking for on those kind of commanders nowadays. So if you have 10% defense and a conditional 30% attack on a Garrison, right, you're seeing how I saw how that was a little bit weak. Anyway, so this skill, really, really strong. Next up, Ravager of Land and Spirit. And now this is where it gets kind of complicated, so stay with me now. So if this commander is attacking a troop on the map, their troop gain 10 stacks of the Malice effect whenever it uses an active skill. If its number of Malice stacks is higher than the target's percentage of units remaining, it spends 10 Malice stacks to deal smite damage to the target, damage factor of 300. It also gains a 10% bonus to severe wounds inflicted, which is cool, and a 20% bonus to rage recovery speed for 1 second, cooldown of 1 second. So this can proc every turn, essentially. Now, how does this skill work? I will say off the bat, it's not super strong in the beginning phases of combat. And I know that there is a recent shift in the meta where everyone's like, you want your active skill, and then you're going to fall out of combat, and then you're going to go back in, like hit and run, dropping combat, etc. This commander and this skill specifically is not good for that. You need time to ramp this up. So you're going to fire your active skill, you're going to get 10 stacks. You're going to fire your secondary skill, you're going to get 20 stacks. Now, if you hit a target that's 20% or less health, then you're going to deal a damage factor bonus of 300, and you're going to get reduced by 10 stacks, right? Does that make sense? So in general, you're going to want this skill to stack up to like 60 or 70 stacks. And now every time you're firing an active skill against targets that are around that 60 to 70% health range, which you're doing quite often, you're also doing 300% damage factor, 300 damage factor, and then more sev wounds and rage gen. So if you can get to like that point where you're, I don't know, maybe a minute and a half in combat, you've fired off maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 skills. Now this skill becomes really strong because you're literally already at high stacks. You're hitting people, 300 damage factor, right? You can kind of see how it gets really strong. But you need to be in combat for a little while. And with that said, these next skills really bring that gameplay and that forced gameplay to the limelight. So now you do 10% more normal damage on the map. Great. Smite commanders always love that. When attacking the field troop, you gain 10% or 10 stacks of malice upon entering combat. Great. And then 10 stacks of malice for every 10% of units you lose. So in the grand scheme of things, you're going to be generating a lot more malice stacks from going ahead and firing off your active skills in the field. But this is nice little extra bonus that you can get for taking some damage. And speaking of taking damage, the expertise is all about taking damage. So a 5% bonus to smite damage dealt up to 30% for every 10% of units it is missing. So once you are missing, give or take, what is this? 60% of your units, you're dealing 30% more smite damage, which again is good if you are lower health. And that leads us to the expertise. And this is again where I think this might be a typo. But this is all about staying in the field for as long as you possibly can and not just running it down and quick combats, right? So after severely wounding 400,000 enemy units, it gains 5% bonus to normal damage dealt. Guys, I don't know if you guys understand how much severely wounding 400,000 enemy units is. That's like getting 10 million KP in one report. That almost never happens unless you're a siege march, okay? So you can pretty much just kiss this 5% bonus to normal damage goodbye. It just doesn't even exist on his kit. So yeah, this might be a typo. This might not be. Maybe it's 400,000 severely and slightly wounded units. That would make sense. And when we go back in game, I'll actually show you a report that I have to kind of demonstrate how crazy this 400,000 sev wound unit cap or requirement is. Anyway, so this, I'm not even going to include this 5% bonus to normal damage dealt because it'll never pop. But when you go down to 50% units remaining, you deal 60% more damage and take 30% less damage for 6 seconds, which is a Leonidas type effect. And then you also have another threshold where if you go down to 15% units, you deal 100% more damage and take 50% less damage. And obviously this can only trigger once per hour once it leaves your city, resetting once you go back into your city. So what do I think of this commander? I think this guy is very clearly a ramping commander, just like the Garrison. It is very much so trying to get you in combat for long periods of time to stack up your malice stacks so that you are firing off little bursts of smite damage compared with Liu Che and his combo attack, where you're just doing a ton of little normal damage as well as 2 massive active skills. I do think that this 400,000 units thing is a bunch of baloney, and I have no idea why that exists, but I do think that there are really cool implications that you can do with this commander. One of them being counter rallies. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but now stay with me, okay? You are going to be in the field pairing this with, I guess, Skippy Emilianus as a counter rally, and you are just going to send this and it's going to die, okay? Because that's usually what counter rallies do. But you are going to be doing a ton of malice stacks as well as severely wounding a ton of enemy units really quickly and doing an absolute boatload of counterattack damage, and you're going to get a ton of damage reduction. So if you can spam fail this for 12 seconds, that's all I'm asking for. 12 seconds once this connects to the enemy rally, and then just let it die, I think that this rally could do some work. Obviously, guys, as a field pairing and a field commander, it's just going to be paired with Liu Che. It's going to be part of the best combo in the game. It's going to be ridiculous. Everybody should invest in this commander, even if I don't think that the kit is really that great for short combats. I think it is good enough once you start stacking up. And as a counter rally, this thing can do some real work. But let's actually hop in game now to show you how ludicrous this 400,000 enemy units severely wounding actually is. All right, here we are in game. Again, just the most obvious pairing. It's going to be Liu Che. Really quickly, do I think that this commander is better than Liu Che? I would honestly say no, because it doesn't have this built-in rage engine, but they are very close. I would put this commander obviously at S tier, Liu Che maybe still S plus, but they are very, very close. Anyway, to go ahead and look at the report and how crazy 400,000 Sev wounds is, guys, this is a good report. This is 1 March, Skippy, Liu Che. I used this in an altar fight, I believe, last KVK, and you can see this is like as good of a report as you can get, all right? This is 700% positive. I got 5 million kill points from this report, and I only did 265,000 Sev wounds. Now, I do have 214,000 troops remaining, but, you know, this is like an anomaly. This is micromanaging 1 March and only using 1 March. So do I really think that that 400,000 troops will ever occur on the field? No, which is why, you know, maybe as a counter rally, maybe. So my overall suggestions and thoughts, yes, both commanders are going to be meta. You will run Gorgo and the new Garrison. You will also run Liu Che, probably primary, but we're going to have to do some testing just because of that attack tree, and I don't know, we'll see. But you'll probably run Liu Che primary to the new open field commander, and we will see where we end up. But either way, it's a good time to be an Inf main, and Inf are getting a lot of love. Now, to be fair, Cav just got Arthur, so we'll see where the meta ends up, but hey, I'm happy. I'm an Inf main. Anyway, guys, see you next time. Peace.